Welcome back, friends, to 5 Agendas. This one is going to be on Rabbi Tovia Singer. You may or may not have heard of him. This is going to be 4 parts throughout the month of September, so stay tuned for those. But we'll begin with the first one. Here we go. For those of you who look at the title of this discussion and go, ooh, then say, oh, I can be doing other things. Let it be said, this discussion takes into consideration the mindset of the Rabbinate at the time of the Third Temple. In other words, it's a very important 4-part discussion, especially for those who faced the dragon and the 8th king at the time Jesus confirmed was the abomination of desolation, Matthew 24:15. For those who really desire to understand how wide the implications to the first angel's warning, then take heed. Now, Tovia Singer is an American rabbi specializing in Orthodox Judaism that is a counter-missionary effort for outreach Judaism and has made gains for Judaism within the concord of Christianity. Now, I wish I could play all the videos within this, but there would be too much time. So I would encourage you, please, look here. The description box for this thought paper will be below. Here's a little information about him. Okay. The comment section and the link below describe his wide appeal in Christianity. This discussion looks into Tovia's biblical validations and omissions of Daniel chapter 9 and other important scriptures from the Old Testament and their correlation with the New Testament. There's your link. You will observe Tovia misinterprets Daniel 9. That's true according to his refutation. But the problem with it is this: it lacks Acts chapter 8's close of Jewish probation, since this is the question that Tovia asked Christians when it began. In other words, the answer to the commencement of the 70 weeks would be the fall season of 457 BC and its end in Acts chapter 8. What closes the prophecy is not the death of Christ in 31 AD, but the expulsion of the fig tree, which was based on what Gabriel told Daniel, since the 70 weeks were determined upon Daniel's people, and that's probationary time. Compare that with Matthew 23:38. When Jesus said, your house is left empty, desolate, okay? Also, Tovia doesn't explain how the Most Holy was anointed or how everlasting righteousness was ushered in, locking it in with 490 years, which terminated in Acts 8. The Cyrus decree is too early, and whose application of the messianic figure of Cyrus or the cutting off of supposedly the Jewish high priest does not explain the ushering in of everlasting righteousness. So what I'm going to do is, we published these help charts earlier. In fact, they can be found here for February of 2020, 3 chronological segments of Daniel 9 and the 3 decrees, 70 weeks there, and which are these. So you have the 3 chronological segments, and you have this chart that shows how Cyrus and Darius doesn't come anywhere close to the Messiah the Prince, but only the 7th year of Artaxerxes. And you can click on those links that will be in the description box below and have a closer look at those for your help. Now, it is apparently clear that Tovia's exposition in this link that he calls the bogus prophecy of Jesus' crucifixion, he doesn't lock in the time periods with precision, as does the 70 weeks from 457 BC to 34 AD. 70 weeks had to be prior to the destruction of the second temple, and as far as the decree of Cyrus as the starting date in 500s BCE, it didn't culminate in the ushering in of eternal righteousness. And that's where you can see it on those charts I pulled up, see? Okay. In his presentation to the Gnostic believer, the ushering in of everlasting righteousness was not addressed. Let's say his interpretation of the priests being cut off are the anointed one, yet the Messiah didn't appear around 50 BC, neither the true one or the false one. And if you count from the time of the decree of Cyrus, 490 years, it arrives to around 50 BC. And if you calculate from Artaxerxes' 20th year, it's way too late for the Messiah, since it's about 42 AD. And the one decree that works is the fall season of the 7th year, which was proven by way of the solar eclipse pattern. Tovia's Nashville debate. There's that link there. Tovia Singer's Nashville Conference debate with an evangelical scholar who presented excellent points, but lacked the necessary understanding of how to navigate Isaiah 2, as well as Zechariah 9, which according to Tovia are foundational, since according to him, Christians cannot address, and leave out Zechariah 9:10 while explaining verse 9 in reference to Jesus coming on a donkey. Now, here's where it really gets interesting. And this is why we have to say that of all the thought papers, these are just about the most important for you to pay attention to. Here we go into it. So in order to gain support, he brought in Isaiah 2 regarding the Messianic kingdom in reference to the whole world, excepting Judaism. But Isaiah presents the matter in the latter days, and clearly this scenario will be fulfilled in reference to the decision that was rendered at the end of the 70 weeks. In other words, the end of the 70 weeks was not the end of days. It says, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. Lucifer will give them what they always wanted as well, and this is also tied into the probationary times of the Gentiles, as Luke 21:24 presents the kairoi, or probation of the nations, who are now given over into deception, and also which the two witnesses of Revelation 11 must clear up, just prior to the outpouring of God's wrath in the form of the 7 last plagues. The tip-off is found in the statement, a law will come out of Jerusalem city. Verse 3, and this matches the great city scenario of Revelation 11. A law will come out. Isaiah 2:3, and many people shall go and say, come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law for the Lord from Jerusalem. And when they, from Revelation 11, the two witnesses shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city. A law going forth and the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Tovia also used Zechariah 9, saying that Christians use the prophecy of the Messiah riding on a donkey, yet deny what is stated in verse 10. So can you answer it? Will you be able to? That's why it's important to pay attention. The reader should now understand immediately the implications of Zechariah 9:10. Verse 9 applies to Jesus, who clearly fulfilled that prophecy. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, even upon a colt, the foal of an ass. Verse 10 applies to Messiah ben David and should be linked with Daniel 11:45, which equals the end of Beni Ephraim. Ephraim is the seventh king. Remember, 5 are fallen. One is. The other's not yet to come. When he comes last but a short time. So this Ephraim is the seventh king of Revelation 17 and is pictured in the airport murals. Okay. See that? Okay. It'll give you an idea. I would encourage you to spend some more time having a look at this. Okay. Now, which reveals the rest with Darth Vader under the feet of Beni VIII. Okay. And that's the 8th king, as well as the fact that Darth is seen in the setting of Daniel 11:40-45. Then Beni David is seen in reference to what is stated in the UN about weapons of war turned into implements of farming. Zechariah 9:10, and I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace unto the nations. And his dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. This happens when Beni Ephraim enters the glorious land as deliverer. That's what Daniel 11:45 about. That king of the north. Christians who encounter Tovia do not know how to navigate around Isaiah 2 and Zechariah 9:9-10, let alone Revelation 17 and Daniel 11:40-45. That's why it's so important to know how to navigate these chapters around individuals like Tovia. Elsewise, you're going to get stumped, you're going to question, you're going to be deceived. Zechariah 9:9-10 is somewhat like the 2 goats, but in this case, it's the beast, in contrast to Jesus who comes in peace. Whereas the scenario of Zechariah 9:10 is when the 8th king, okay, who brings down Beni Ephraim, the 7th, that's the 7th king. The scenario of Zechariah 9:10 is replaced by Revelation 19:19-20, which says, and I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat upon the horse, and against his army. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought the signs in his sight, wherewith he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that had worshipped his image. They too were cast alive into the lake of fire that burneth with brimstone. In other words, about the matter that wasn't presented by the young guy, whom Tovia tore apart, Tovia must respond to the accuracy of 457 BC up to Acts 8. Tovia asked him to present the chronology, but the young man didn't have an understanding of what Tovia was requesting. It is namely the matter of the 70-week determination on my people, and all the way up to Acts 8's persecution, and then the going forth of the gospel to the nations. What determined the close of the 70 weeks was not the coming of the Messiah. It was the determination upon Daniel's people to accept him, and the evidence was unmistakable. The gospel went out to the Gentiles since everlasting righteousness was ushered in. The disciples testified of the risen Christ. The authorities could not produce the body which was placed in the tomb and surrounded by a legion of Roman soldiers that were placed there to guard it, since the reason for this was that the religious leaders believed that the disciples would steal the body and claim that Jesus had risen. According to them, this would be a major problem. The problem is that what they feared the most is what took place, and the body didn't need to be stolen. Jesus, in fact, rose from the dead. This took place 3.5 years prior to 34 AD, specifically in 31 AD, as well as prior to the destruction of the Second Temple, whose sacrifices pointed to the Messiah, and they, the beloved Jewish people, are at a loss to explain why their sacrifices came to an end to this day. The problem many Christians make regarding the 70 weeks prophecy is that many believe in the dispensational view, and they cannot close the 70 weeks prophecy, since they believe that the final 7 years were not fulfilled and were transported somehow to the future and are to be fulfilled by the Antichrist, who forms a 7-year pact with the Jews, and in the midst of the prophetic week of 7 years, he breaks the pact. And this is why the chart, see, this is why the 7th year of Artaxerxes was the beginning, the 457 BC, for the 490 years to the 70 weeks, because the Messiah was cut off in the midst of that week here in 31 AD. There's your 34 AD. It can't be the Cyrus decree or the Darius one or the Artaxerxes 20th year. And you can't have 70 weeks, 69 weeks, and then the 70th week is somehow transported to the future and fulfilled at a later time, when prophecy that was given was 70 weeks, and there was nothing about 69 weeks at this time, and then in the future, the 70th week would be fulfilled. It's not there. Determined upon thy people and thy holy city. So the 70-week prophecy, which Daniel said in 924, actually applies to Jewish probationary time, which expired in 34 AD. Well, the thing is, it is misinterpreted and reinterpreted with the belief that the Antichrist fulfills a 7 years period in the distant future. The problem with that is the following. We have already proven that the closing period was based on the determination of Daniel's people, starting in 457 BC. It had nothing to do with the Antichrist. So why 457 BC? The reason being that it was one of 3 decrees in relation to the matter of the rebuilding of the house of God in Jerusalem after the captivity of the Jews ended. And that specific decree, unlike the other 2, this one, unlike these other 2, provided the legal framework for the building of the house of God in Jerusalem, and it's the only decree that locks accurately into the time frame of the Messiah. The other decrees, such as Cyrus' decree of 539 BC, was too early for the arrival of the Messiah being anointed. Here, see, too early. And then put to death. This would have supposedly taken place more or less around 50 BC, if we use the Cyrus decree along with the 490-year chronology. Whereas the decree of the Medo-Persian king Artaxerxes, Longamani minus 20th year, is too far in the future. See? Too far. Utilizing a 490-day period starting from 445 BC would take us to 42 AD, and that date is way too late for the Messiah. The only one that locks in perfectly is Artaxerxes' decree of his 7th year, and when you calculate a 490-year period from the fall of 457 BC, you arrive at 34 AD, right here. This period of 70 weeks or 490 years based on the year-day principle, closed in 34 AD, and it's based on the information provided in the book of Acts, chapter 8, which verifies that the prophecy was indeed fulfilled to the fullest, since Jesus rescinded his order regarding the preaching of the gospel to the Samaritans and to the Gentiles in Matthew 10, verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, Go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. Now that changed, and they were to go. Meaning that Israel was no longer the favored nation, and this was determined by the close of the corporate probationary time, as said by Jesus in Matthew 23:38. Tovia's playground, the 7-year gap theory. This is Tovia's playground, since Christians cannot close the 70 weeks with the gap theory. And I want to reiterate, that's all it is. It's just a theory. This is the prophecy. Yet they want to prove that Jesus, right, was the anointed one and was later crucified on the cross without closing the time period of 70 weeks, which makes no sense. So Tovia goes on to rip them apart with the 36 or so years leading to 70 AD, saying that the destruction of the city of Jerusalem goes way over the 490-year period, and he is right. So closing the prophecy with the determination of the people is the crucial factor. The final rejection by way of the killing of Stephen, who read them the verdict in his description of the history of Israel from the time of Moses up to the present time of his own death, and later the great persecution that broke out against the early church, cemented the corporate close of probation. Prior to that fulfillment, Jesus gave instructions to his disciples to not go into any of the towns of the Samaritans or to go among the Gentiles. His order was to first preach to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and this was not to be in the area of Jerusalem, but into Europe, since it was in 722 to 721 BC that the Assyrians had taken the 10 lost tribes captive and removed them from their land and placed other people from the peoples they had conquered into the area of the northern tribes. These people came to be known as Samaritans. Now you understand why the Jews hated them so much. They were a mixed people and were extremely hated by the house of Judah in the south. Jesus later rescinded that initial order, which is found in Matthew 10, verse 5, and permitted the preaching of the gospel to the Gentiles and the Samaritans in Acts 8, after the church was driven out of Jerusalem. Those events marked the final demarcation line of Jewish probationary time and fulfilled what was written, Daniel 9, regarding the matter of the angel Gabriel's statement to Daniel, namely, that the 70 weeks, or the 490 years, are determined upon thy people and thy sanctuary and thy holy city. Jesus alluded to this time frame when he was asked by the disciples the following question from Acts 1. They therefore, when they were come together, asked him, saying, Lord, dost thou at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? And he said unto them, It is not for you to know the times or seasons which the Father has set within his own authority. But ye shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and ye shall be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and unto the uttermost part of the earth. And when he had said these things, as they were looking, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. Fact is that the Father's authority was already established in Daniel 9's 70-week prophecy. The fact is that the disciples were in fact witnesses in Jerusalem. The day of Pentecost, the gospel had been preached, and many were converted. The preaching to the uttermost parts of the earth, which was the second phase of the preaching, had to involve the lost sheep of the house of Israel, as previously explained, since the disciples ventured off into Europe. The Catholic Church claims that James passed through the town of Compostela. In Spanish, they named the town Santiago de Compostela, which translates as either as James of Compostela or backward Compostela of James. You can have a look at that link. The latter appears to be the proper way of translating the verse. The final phase of the uttermost would be first to the Samaritans after the close of the Jewish probationary time with the 70 weeks, 490 years, and the rest of the uttermost would involve the commencement of the probationary times of the nations. So when the Jewish probation closed, the probation for the nations started, 34 AD. One ended, one started, the other started, went to what Luke 21:24 was all about. The times of the nations is mentioned in Luke 21:24. See? All right. Next, we are going to talk about the Tovia Singer rebuttal. To be continued. I think now you're starting to hopefully realize how important to know these things. Think about it this way. If someone like Tovia Singer came up to you and asked you these questions, especially with Zechariah and Isaiah 2, would you be able to answer them? Stay tuned. God bless.